I want you to see something that's happening today, as I was reading an email from a viewer, an Irish folk musician, telling me about something that's happening on Kildare Street in Dublin. As I sit here and record this video, and possibly even right now as you watch it, you need to see this. And also, as well as that, I will tell you some ways that you can help. The viewer I mentioned, right, his name is Darren, and he's an Irish folk musician. He shared a song with me that he wrote, and it's about this awful situation. I'm going to share the song with you later in the video, along with more information on how you can help. But first, picture this. You're in Dublin. There's a protest going on, but it's a quiet one. It's an act born from heartbreak and courage. The kind that only comes when you've lost everything and still choose to take a stand. These people are taking a stand for themselves. But unless you're more aware of what they're fighting for, you might just look the other way, which I fear is the case. They are also taking a stand for over 4,000 people who are in the same boat as them. 4 people have stopped eating. They're on hunger strike. I only just found out on day 33 days without food. And today is going into day 34. Literally nothing but water and coffee keeping them going. I want you to think about that for a second. 34 days without food. We're going to talk about what they're fighting for in a minute, but first I want you to meet them, because once you do, you're not going to forget them. Their names are Maris Patton O'Connell, Mary Donovan, Miriam Moriarty Owens, and Mary Dunleavy Green. Obviously, when a hunger strike goes on too long, the body can only survive so long before it basically starts to eat itself, taking whatever reserves you had to burn for energy. And when there's no more reserves left to burn, we all know what happens. And they're all well aware of these facts as well. And they're very courageous for carrying on. Can you imagine having that conversation with yourself even, right? But don't even stop there. These people have families. These people have kids who love them. They are doing this to be heard because unfortunately, they haven't been taken seriously. The 4,000 people they're fighting for haven't been taken seriously. Okay, so I think it's time to give you a little bit of background on what it is that they're fighting for. And here, look, I consider myself a normal person, right? Who loves Irish music and has suddenly taken a liking to making videos, right? But I'll be honest here, I didn't know about these industrial schools in Ireland, right? And there's another name for them as well, reformative schools. I didn't know about them at all. I didn't know about them until one of my viewers, Darren, emailed me about this issue. But when I read about it, I was absolutely shocked. I really want you, while you're watching this video, tell me down in the comments, like, did you know about these schools? Were you aware of them? Do you have any experiences with them yourselves from family members? Or have I just been living under a mossy rock for the last few years? I was very shocked that I didn't know about this, right? So I went and looked up, was there any reformative school in my town? And there was actually. And apparently it's been there since the famine years. 1857 or something like that. And actually I was told by my parents that this particular building was in fact the nun's house, because it was attached to a girls' secondary school. The building was basically abandoned since I was a child. And today, the entire building has been since renovated to house refugees. So it just completely went under my radar. But really quick, right? What are these industrial schools, or reformatory schools, right? They were state and church-run institutions in Ireland where poor, orphaned, or so-called neglected children were sent, usually to work. I read of articles as well of children learning how to make shoes, for example. But they were often taken from their families and raised in these harsh, abusive conditions. Children were beaten and many were sexually abused. The one that I mentioned earlier on in my local area, this is one of the locations with, and I quote, inconsistent punishment records. And our 4 hunger strikers here, these were some of the victims of these harsh conditions. And what is it that they're fighting for? It's very simple. Vital things. They want the government to make good on promises that were made in 1999 by former Taoiseach Bertie Ahern.
On behalf of the state and all the citizens of the state, the government wishes to make a sincere and long overdue apology to the victims of childhood abuse for our collective failure to intervene, to detect their pain and to come to their rescue. The primary focus of the Commission will be to provide victims with an opportunity to tell of the abuse they suffered in a sympathetic and experienced forum. In addition, the Commission will establish as complete a picture as possible of the causes, the extent of physical and sexual abuse of children in institution and in other places.
Mr Ahern said, in the interests of justice and the common good, a commission of inquiry into childhood abuse was being established, at first on a non-statutory basis and with deliberately broad terms of reference. The Taoiseach also announced that the government will spend an extra £4 million a year on professional counselling services for survivors of all childhood abuse. Meanwhile, RTE's States of Fear documentary, which goes out tonight, reveals that an official investigation found that children in Madonna House in Dublin complained of sexual abuse for 8 years before anything was done. And it publishes the hitherto hidden criticisms in the report of the Sisters of Charity who ran the children's home. It called the nuns' management incompetent. Turning to St Joseph's Industrial School in Kilkenny, the programme details several cases of sexual abuse of boys by 3 convicted paedophiles during the 1970s.
I haven't seen the programme myself, but as a congregation we are increasingly appalled and angered as each new case of abuse emerges.
Some of these promises were for a full contributory pension and a specific medical card. A Health Amendment Act card, HAA. This isn't just a normal medical card. It's one that would cover the awful medical and psychological wounds left by their childhood trauma. Things like dental work and counselling. It would also mean home care for them if they required when they get older. Because in all honesty, why would they want to be sent to a state-run nursery home in their final years when the state had failed to take care of them in their early years? For these survivors, many of whom couldn't hold down a steady job because of the abuse that they suffered, that pension is everything. And let's keep in mind 2 things. It's shocking expensive to live nowadays. You always hear about cost of living going up, but wages never really do. And also, it's not just for the 4 of them, remember that, but for the roughly 4,000 industrial school survivors still with us in Ireland today. Oh yeah, by the way, it's estimated that between 1930 and 1970 that 42,000 children were discharged from these industrial schools. But why am I mentioning the 4,000 people? There's a big difference there. But keep in mind that many of these people have passed away, and today it's estimated that there are 4,000 survivors of these reformative schools still alive today. Now, something that crossed my mind as well when I read about this and when I got the email from Darren, and it's actually got me very worried about the well-being of Maurice, Miriam, Mary Donovan and Mary Green. This kind of sacrifice, this ultimate act of protest, it echoes back through Irish history, doesn't it? It reminded me of Bobby Sands and his comrades. He died after 66 days on hunger strike, aged 27. Bobby wrote a song back home in Derry, among other songs as well, but this one's the most popular. This song in particular was set to music and popularised by Christy Moore. But here we have hunger strikers again on Kildare Street, and Darren writing a song to support them. As of recording this video, the Kildare Street hunger strikers are now going into their 34th day of hunger strike. Also, it was mentioned that the government has a long weekend this weekend, the 24th to the 26th of October, and it's also midterm next week, so potentially our friends will probably not hear anything back until they are moving into their 44th day of hunger strike. They're demanding that the state finally look them in the eye and acknowledge the damage done in those schools. Now, to really understand what they're doing, you have to understand what these industrial or reformative schools were. Picture this, a system set up over 150 years ago, back in like 1868. On paper, the idea was charitable, okay? It was to look after children who were neglected, orphaned, and abandoned. But that's not how it turned out, unfortunately. But by 1929, the rules were changed, allowing the authorities to send destitute children to these places, even if they have committed no crime at all. There is also an interesting bit that I read on Wikipedia. If a child was caught begging, they would be charged and sent to an adult prison. However, if a child was caught for stealing or burglary, right, they would be sent to these industrial schools or reformatories. Anyway, what it became was a system where the state, hand in hand with the church, could hide away the children of the poor. Children like Maurice Patton O'Connell, who was only 6 months old when he was sent into Pembroke House. Often these children had mothers and fathers still living. Struggling parents would sometimes leave their kids there, thinking it was only temporary, a safe place until they got back on their feet, but only to find out the system wouldn't let them have their children back. The children were labelled as undeserving. Their families as well were judged by the morals of the church and state. The government and the church were central to all of this. Most of the industrial schools here were run by religious orders like the Christian Brothers and the Sisters of Mercy, but they were paid for out of the public purse. The heartbreaking truth that came out years later in official inquiries was that the charity work often got lost behind making money and keeping secrets. The religious orders cared more about protecting their own reputations than protecting the children. Let's just say that again. The people responsible for these schools or institutions deliberately hid acts of child abuse to protect their reputation so that they could still earn money. Absolutely sickening. So what was happening behind those high walls? The Commission to Inquire into Child Abuse, the Ryan Report as it's known, found that children suffered systematic and sustained physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. Kids were often forced to work on farms, in hotels, or as nannies, and never saw a penny for their labour. And as we know today, the time that they've worked has not been counted towards their pension. Survivors like Morris himself talk about being beaten, starved, and sexually assaulted for years on end. Children had their identities stripped away. They became a number. Can you imagine being only known as a number? And the state just let it happen. The whole system was a collective failure, with the government failing to step in and protect the most vulnerable in the country, our children. And that history, that horror, brings us right back to that small, makeshift campsite outside the Dáil today. The 4 survivors are facing death because, as Morris says himself, the commitment the state made back in 1999, an apology and a promise of lifelong support, has been broken for over 26 years. They feel that they were left with no other choice but this. We know that their time is running out. They had a meeting with Minister Helen McEntee recently, who knew all about their strike, but offered them nothing new apparently, nothing solid. They are determined though. They've vowed to see this through unless they get a written promise that their demands will be met. But right now, not enough people know about this. This is the problem, the fight that's happening on Kildare Street. But we Irish, we have a history of making sure that our stories are not forgotten. When they tried to erase their history long ago, we put it into music, didn't we? We made our stories immortal through song and poetry. Written records were burnt and destroyed, but our songs lived on. And we can use music today to turn up the volume on their cry for help. The viewer that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Darren, he wrote a song about these hunger strikers. Because I think that our news feeds, our social media, are completely filled with news from all over the world, not just Ireland. As Morris says, he doesn't think anyone knows that they're on hunger strike. And I think he's right. We have to make sure that this sacrifice made for the 4,000 survivors who the state failed to protect all those years ago is not for nothing. Just feel the weight of this moment. A desperate, last-ditch struggle for a bit of dignity and care, fought by people who had their lives stolen from by a cruel system. Just because we made mistakes throughout our history, it doesn't mean that we have to ignore them and pretend that they never happened because we're worried about our reputation. What defines us as an individual, or as individuals, is the path that we take after making a mistake. So, how can you help? There's a link in the description and the pinned comment as well to sign a petition to help our friends. We're aiming for 10,000, and I think we're around the 4,000 mark right now. And this is very important to note, I want you to remember this. Once you sign the petition, okay, you're going to get an email to confirm your email address. You must click that, otherwise your signature won't count, okay? So always check your email after you sign the petition. There's a link in the description as well to various Facebook pages where you can follow the hunger strikers if you have Facebook. There's also a link in the description to Darren's song, so share it as much as you can as well. Music connects with people so much more than you think. And also share your thoughts about this down in the comments. These are all very small things, but as well as that, if this video got more traction, the more people it will reach. YouTube is the biggest platform on the entire planet for video sharing. It'll definitely make a difference even if you don't use social media like Facebook. I personally just didn't want to sit around and ignore this. I wanted to make this video with the help of Darren and the 4 hunger strikers as well, to get them a little bit more notice. And you can really help by sharing this and talking about it a little bit more. Let's all together at least help them have a good conversation with the government on how they can live a happy, healthy, sustainable life that's not going to be cut too short on the cold, damp streets of Dublin.
Those 4 hunger strikers whose rights you have denied. There's Morris, Patton O'Connell, Mary Donovan, Mary Dunleavy Green, Miriam Moriarty Owens, who after 26 years begin to fade away. on the cold streets of Dublin on their hunger strike today. So shame on you now if you let these people die, those 4 hunger strikers whose rights you have denied.
To end on a powerful quote from Miriam herself, as soon as you entered those doors, your life changed forever. They stripped you of your name, your personality, your dignity, your voice. We were given numbers. I am not 1061 anymore. My name is Miriam. This is my voice, our voices.